Hello, friends.
Hello, folks.
Hello.
Hey everyone.
Are we officially in the AI note-taking game?
Yay. Does it work?
That's my question. Yeah. I feel like my only complaint with the note-taking tools, automating them is extremely cool because it's actually a lot of work to take notes. But they don't have like intuitive context on which things are worth taking notes on and which things aren't. So it's like the difference between a transcription and notes is not always all that significant. I need them to know like what is actually meaningful to take down and what is just filler.
But it's really important that what my cat is feeling right now and that there's snow outside. These things have to be noted.
I mean, you're not wrong. Those are those are pretty important. The GraphQL community needs to know
You know,
about how much your cat loves snow.
if you now have a GitHub action which runs in the background and automatically generates issues based on action items, you can actually go really rogue during the meeting. You can just say, we need new action item, ping, new issues.
Great. Let's automate ourselves out of jobs. Considering that all of our jobs are volunteer jobs, we'll automate ourselves out of being volunteers. Sounds great.
What a sad world.
I just had my agenda file up and it disappeared on me. Where'd it go? Looks like we're waiting on, let's see. Oh, we have 9 people on our agenda and 10 in the audience. So that means we're officially over quorum. Woo! Sweet. All right, let's kick things off. Oh, now 11. Oh, okay, one of those is our note taker. So I can do math, I promise. All right, folks, let's get started. Welcome all. February working group. We got a decent amount of stuff to talk about. I think today is going to be fun because we can go deep in a couple specific areas. We don't have to kind of go broad across like a dozen separate topics. We just got a handful. But if there are other things we want to talk about, I think we've got a little bit of space today to tap into them. If anybody has anything in the back of their minds that they want to make sure that we cover, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the agenda just to make sure we're all looking at the same thing. Zach, I see your note there, and we'll figure that out. Just try again. If you need to put up a separate PR, that's fine. We'll get it merged. But it is important that we get everybody there so we have a good record of who attends which meetings. We end up using those in a lot of different ways. But hey all, thanks for being here. Of course, by being here, we all agree to our rules of the road, which is the spec membership agreement, participation guidelines, contribution guide, and code of conduct. Links, of course, are always at the top of the agenda if anyone ever wants to peruse those. Let's do a quick round the room of intros, and we can use the order listed on the agenda file. And if you're not there yet, then just pop in at the end. So, hello everybody. My name is Lee.
Hey folks, I'm Benji.
Hey everyone, Rob. Hey, Martin here.
Hey, Benoit from Apollo.
Hi, I'm Pascal.
Hi, I'm Oli.
Hi, I'm Michael.
Hey, I'm Zach. Oh.
Hi, I'm Matt.
I'm Steven.
All right. Steven and Zach, as soon as you get PRs up, just ping me in chat and I'll get those merged. Thanks everybody for being here. I see note-taking bot, but I guess I should ask just for clarity. Are we all good on the note-taking front? Do we have all of our tools in place and people paying attention to make sure we don't miss anything along the way?
I matched Steven.
Thank you, Michael. All right. Quick look over the agenda. Oh, do I need to check to see if there's extra items? Okay, the main things we have today are we have TSC election results. So I have a couple minutes I'd like to spend talking about the TSC elections. We can talk a little bit about our community working group, which we have a new repository set up for. Thank you, Yuri. The GraphQL playground we should discuss for a bit. And then I'm excited to go deep on streaming GraphQL with Rob. Anything beyond those things that we want to cover today? All right, take silence as gaveling this agenda. Okay, right at the top, TSC elections. Thank you to my TSC friends for getting in all of our votes. Similar to last year, we were roughly a month behind. I may just like permanently shift our voting schedule because it does mean that we end up doing nominations and votings right over the winter holidays, which is typically the one window of time where we're sort of paying attention the least, and it always drags on a little longer than I'd like. But nonetheless, we've got them in place, and we've got some new friendly faces. Congrats, Pascal and Martin. Thrilled to have you guys both on the TSC. And thanks to all of our emeritus as well. I got some nice messages from Andy this morning, saying how happy he's been to be on the TSC since the beginning, and he looks forward to continuing to stay abreast and involved as an emeritus. So, yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I went through this last night and this morning to try to make sure all of our various places are updated. But Pascal and Martin, as you get added to things, if you could like poke around and spot if anything looks missing, and just like put up PRs to make sure that like, your personal information is represented correctly in all those various spots, I would be appreciative of that. But yeah, congrats and welcome to TSC. Let's see. Okay, I guess I should just maybe open the floor for a sec. Any questions or comments or anything on the TSC in general, election process, or anything else? Hands. Okay. Benji, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One is regarding the schedule for voting. I have actually added a feature to our agenda scheduler that means that when the agenda is created for the relevant months, I think like November, December, January, the relevant topics will be added to the agenda, which I hope will help keep us honest. If we do want to move it back a month, we'll need to change those, but that's fine. But yeah, hopefully that will act as a reminder. And secondly, for the TSC members here, I spent some time this morning writing out a handbook for TSC members just off the top of my head. So it's nothing official. Other TSC members that have been doing this for a while, please do contribute to that. But it helps us to know where all the different locations are for different things, what things we should have access to, and other things like that. So just to make you aware that that now exists, at least in the initial version.
That's very cool.
Can you drop a link for that?
Yeah, it's in the TSC repo in the
Okay.
root folder.
Benji, I was going to ask if there's how much of that is sort of intentionally kept TSC eyes only, and how much of that should just be like publicly known operating guidelines. It might be interesting to have something like that sit in the top level working group for like these are the things that we expect from the TSC, and the community at large can kind of hold the TSC accountable for doing these things, or because I think there's often a common question of, when do we operate as we usually do? When do we need to go to a TSC member? And that sounds super helpful to have that, and I'm curious how much that we could pull forward into public space.
I haven't written it with the intention of it being public, but I'm sure that much of it could be. I will share this paragraph that I wrote near the top. Here's a not so secret. The TSC doesn't actually do much beyond what the regular working group members can do, so this document will likely be quite short. But let's get into some of the TSC specific things and onboarding steps you may want to take part in.
Cool. I love it. For what it's worth, I think it's incredibly helpful to just have like a candid one in that space as well. So huge props for taking the initiative and putting that together. That's really helpful. Stephen, hand.
Yeah, I just want to say briefly, as a graduating TSC member, it's been a pleasure being part of the TSC with you all. And also, I'm just super excited to see some new blood, and particularly Martin and Pascal, who have been so active, doing a lot of important work for several years. So I'm excited to see them.
Thanks, Stephen. Obviously, we're not losing you too far. One of the things, actually, I don't know if I mentioned this, but one of the things I did set up as I was going through the mechanics of wiring up new TSC members in place is I set up a GitHub team group called TSC Emeritus. And I added Stephen, I added you, I added Andy. I actually went back and just anyone who's ever been on the TSC, I added to that group and gave that group like a handful of access rights across the repo. So it's like not quite as broad as the TSC member proper. But my sense is that it's like unless there's like some extenuating circumstance where someone is like forcibly removed or something, then we might bend this rule. But I figure being voted into the TSC is sort of like a lifetime denotation of like trust and respect in the GraphQL community, and like that ought to hold like some enduring set of access. Most of it is like continuing to be able to access the TSC private repo. So you have sort of like a direct line if you need to report stuff or like chime in on a thing. So it doesn't have like all of the chartered responsibilities of the TSC. I figured that's probably the right balance. Oh, sweet.
Yeah,
Thank you, Benji.
and I also found that it's a good idea when we have like discussions around technical topics where we want to vote on to have the thoughts of former TSCs.
Yeah. So my hope is that I kind of just optimistically put that into place. Was hoping that it would not be a controversial decision to do that.
Do we keep them
Pascal.
also in the Signal group? Sorry.
Yeah, I was not asking about the Signal group. I was asking about is the security group, is that a TSC only thing? Or is this something that just so that we get that the right people in the ecosystem get the hint,
I think that's right. Yeah, the idea is there's a handful of things that need to be private first. Security vulnerability review is one of those things, and there's like a very short list of others. And my thinking in general was there's one group of people who should be trusted to be in those private spaces, which includes both active TSC and TSC Emeritus. But the set of folks who are accountable for driving action on those are the TSC. So as you graduate the TSC into Emeritus, you essentially get to be an observing bystander. So if you want to proactively volunteer to take effort on a thing, like no one's going to stop you. That's amazing. But the Emeritus are not expected to step in and drive any of those things. That's something that the TSC are accountable for. But my sense was like there wasn't a lot of value in removing folks from those discussion groups, especially like security vuln review. Everyone who's been a TSC Emeritus member has like some insight, connection back to an important organization, or like something that would be net helpful. So it didn't seem worthwhile to remove it. Generally, like a lot of the security reviews, we should not say that they're like fixed closed spaces that only the TC members can join, rather that they are private. They need to start as private repos so that we can have like clear line of action before opening them up. And then we should just use the TSC's judgment to decide who gets folded in, because there may be moments where we need to fold in members from a particular organization who are particularly affected by that vulnerability, or like whatever we needed to do. So it's just the fact that it's not like raw open to the whole internet on day one, so we can do the appropriate work. And generally our rule so far has been we just kind of trust each individual TSC member to use good judgment. And there are very few occasions where we actually fall back and say we truly need to vote on this to take an action. And we trust that like most things can be kind of retroactively undone if we decide otherwise. And then for the things that we just say like, this is not an obvious thing that we should do, I'm going to call for a vote. That way we sort of all feel like we're able to continue to make progress and not get stuck by having to wait on the entire group's consensus to do anything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just to get this the word out, I believe is important, and only
Totally.
to people and not to the wrong people. That's also important.
Yeah. And for the same reason, I saw a message in chat about Signal. The emeritus are welcome to remain in we have like a TSC group on Signal. Anyone can just like message me on Signal at any time, by the way, whether you're a member of the TSC or not. It's just a way to get in touch with me quickly. But it's helpful to have that Signal group as a way to like have fast moving conversation. And I think that basically codifies the thing we were already doing, because the TSC channel, I think like Sasha is still in the TSC channel. A couple other emeritus are still in that TSC channel. It didn't seem particularly helpful to boot them out. Like if you really want to leave because you don't want to participate in the noise, like you're more than welcome to just do that. But it didn't seem like there was a worthwhile reason to boot out emeritus. Yeah, pension chat. Yes. The times the Signal group is the most active is during GraphQL Conf, because we're all trying to figure out how to find each other to get meals. Okay, thanks for letting me wax on about TSC stuff for much more than 2 minutes. Yuri, I'd love to hand things over to you to talk about the community working group.
Thanks, Lee. I'll try to keep it short. It's not as important as the other stuff. Just wanted to highlight a new working group that we're trying. And the first meeting that will come up in, I think, around a week. I send a link to the agenda of the first meeting. Very shortly about the new community working group. It started from, I think, 2 goals that Lee very smartly articulated in the board meetings, for us to basically add more transparency and empowering the community to the general community work that we're doing. So we're trying this new format, basically taking the successful format of the working groups and bringing it into more stuff that we as a community do around community. So I said a lot of time the word community. I think what currently we're deliberately trying to make it very broad, but I think what we can discuss there is stuff that are not necessarily don't necessarily fit into like the current technical working group. So maybe stuff around the GraphQL.org websites and improvements to the docs, maybe stuff around community gatherings, events, conferences, social media posts, community channels like Discord or Slack, anything else that you might think of. But like the working groups, it will be open. It will be managed in the same way that the working groups are being managed. And we hope to see a broad set of people from the GraphQL community come in and ask for things that they wish to see in the community. Maybe think about community growth. Maybe think about the messaging we want to put out there to other communities about the GraphQL community. Just some random ideas that we pick up. In the first meeting, like currently it's monthly, but in the first meeting we also talk about how reoccurring it needs to be, and yeah, so it's one of the things we'll discuss and we'll see. Come in, join, and say and influence the future of this working group. Yeah, that's all for me. If anyone has questions, or you can also ask the questions in the working group, community working group itself.
Thanks for getting this set up. I'm super excited about this. In particular, okay, a little bit of like a history thing. You know, we set up the GraphQL Foundation as sort of this like two-pronged thing. It's like two branches of government, right? It was like, here's the operating principles for the technical project, and we already had this sort of existing working group mechanism that we saw no reason to disrupt. And then we also set up this sort of like project management thing that go for essentially everything that was not the technical work that the foundation board is accountable for. And I think one of the things that we've learned is the original thought was we got to keep, you know, who pays for what and like which organization does what away from like too heavily influencing technical direction. We wanted to make it very clear that the technical work behind GraphQL was very much open and community first and driven by what is best for the project overall, rather than what's best for any particular vendor. Because a lot of other communities and these sort of like open foundations tend to get painted in the direction of where the money gets spent. And I wanted to make it very clear that that was separated. I think that was probably reasonable, but in hindsight, they're a little too far apart, and we've done a handful of things over the last year or so to start to pull them together. So we set up Foundation Observer Board seats for some TSC members and for GraphQL community members. That's been very helpful. And this is the next experiment in that sort of path of like pulling them a little bit more in unison with each other. Managing the community is this ambiguous thing that's like both all of our responsibility as community leaders, but also is under the charter of the foundation is like a key goal that we want the foundation to help drive. And I'm super excited. Like this is a way for us to take the operating model of the working group, which has been very successful because here we all are, what, like a decade later, continuing to do this project and work, while tying it much more closely to a lot of the goals of the foundation overall. So I'm very curious to see how well this goes and what we learn. And hopefully it gives us a little bit of a template for pulling together this active community and the foundation board closer together over time. I think it'll be really helpful. All right, well, let's take that as a bit of an action. We've got the link now. You all should go sign yourselves up for the upcoming community working group meetings. Yuri, I assume you're probably going to do some social media engagement or something to say like, hey, if you're part of the GraphQL community, here's a place where you can come and volunteer.
Yeah, we'll do that early next week, and again, would love to help here also for anyone you think might be interested or relate or relevant. Let them know. Thanks.
Sweet. All right, Benji, you wanted to talk about Playground a bit.
So I did. Okay, we have a repository called GraphQL Playground. This is for the GraphQL Playground, which I believe we inherited a little while back. It doesn't seem to be particularly maintained. My understanding of it was that the intent was that we would have a new version of GraphiQL that was based on like a plugin and preset system, such that we could effectively implement GraphQL Playground on the top of this shared core, and it would just be like a thin layer over the top. GraphQL Playground already uses a number of the GraphiQL components, so this would just be building a nice infrastructure for that. That said, that has yet to materialize. The last commit on this repo is from 3 years ago, and we are having people still filing issues and checking up on issues and saying, why has this not been fixed, etc. So my proposal is, if we don't have someone who is looking to actively maintain this, which we don't seem to, should we archive it for the near term until such a time as someone does want to maintain it?
That's a
don't
good point.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Yuri.
I didn't remember that the idea was to bring back GraphQL Playground's features back to Playground, but maybe that was the case. I think that today GraphQL 4 supposed to include most of the important features of GraphQL Playground, so it's basically superseding it. But I'm not 100% sure.
I think that's broadly the case, yeah. I think there's a few things like the navigation through the docs allowing multiple chained panels, and I'm not super familiar with GraphQL Playground, so I can't speak to it very much, but there's a few things like that that may not have been implemented yet. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's basically going to be a combination of settings and styles was what the intent was. So that it could all be brought into the graphical family.
I guess I'm trying to think through like what's in an ideal world, what do we want here? And then maybe we can back into like, given where we actually are today from practicality point of view, what should we do? And I guess the primary question is, if we did have a bunch of maintainers who were maintaining these things, clearly, this GraphQL Playground has not really been maintained for a couple of years now. Would we have that maintainer drive the vision that you just described? Would we get graphical and GraphQL Playground iterated in tandem? Or would we still say GraphQL Playground is the kind of the old way we recommended to do things, and just use graphical directly, or like use these other tools if you want integration on top of it? Because the alternative that we could try is to just put like a clear warning at the top saying this project is not being actively maintained. You're welcome to use it at your discretion. And by the way, if anyone is interested in maintaining it, we're looking for volunteers.
But what's the value of having two things that do the same? I mean, essentially, graphical has caught up to I would say has caught up to the feature set that we have here. And what's the benefit of two very similar things to maintain them? It's easier to also direct the community to use graphical, like even have a link from Playground to graphical and say, we basically integrated all of it into this tool, use that and help us maintain that.
Yeah, I think if we were to take it forward, it would be as a layer on top of graphical. Graphical itself has a number of these features, but many of them need to be turned on or need to have a plugin pulled in to enable it. Maybe it doesn't have the quite the aesthetics that you would go for, etc. So Playground can act as just a preset over the top of it. That means if you want to get started quickly and you want to have, the kitchen sink to play with, use Playground. If you want to build something yourself that's custom to your needs, then use graphical. And here are all of the configuration options. Graphical is incredibly powerful, and it's built on layers of other things like, the language server, component library, state libraries and stuff. So graphical itself is a bit pick and choose. You can pick the bits of it that you need and use it for things. Whereas Playground, I think, is generally intended to be an end thing that you just use this concrete thing and that is it. So it's perhaps an easier user experience for people to just run Playground rather than to spin up graphical with all the configuration and stuff that you might need to do for that. So that's, I think, the value that it would bring. But I very much feel that as much as possible should be pushed down from GraphQL Playground into graphical, and Playground itself should just be a thin layer.
So this could just be a so you said preset of graphical, so it's actually not graphical Playground anymore. It would just be graphical with a preset. So it has its own. It would probably in the same repository, some package with some suffix. I don't know, ready to run or modern, how it's common to do in the GraphQL ecosystem. And then we could just use this, because archiving a repository doesn't mean it's gone, right? It would just have a much clearer hint that this is no longer recommended to be used, which it probably is, and that if someone wants to maintain it, you can always fork an archived repository as well. So
Yeah, so I think essentially we would do what Lee says, put a note at the top, and then archive it so that it turns off certain features that we don't necessarily want to support. Like, I don't think issues are open once you've archived a repo. Like, you can see historic ones, but you can't file new ones. And we would have direction to point people at graphical from then on.
Also, from a maintainer perspective, you don't want to split the maintainers you maybe have in this space across two products. I rather would have them on graphical to make more progress there than splitting like the ones we have.
I agree with that. It's part of why I was asking about what would our intention be in the best case scenario? Because I could imagine of it, like certainly it does not make sense that we would have two products that do the same thing. Like that they should be merged. They should be merged in the direction of graphical since that's the common core. But it would make more sense if we wanted to keep the sort of like app wrappery nature of the playground. Like it has more of these, it behaves more like an app that the base piece doesn't need. But even then, like it probably makes more sense that it all be hosted out of one graphical repository and just have like a multi-package repo where you can kind of pull the core components if you're building something on top of it, or pull the full app suite. That does seem like it's probably the right long-term angle. So I'm on board. I think archiving to get the right GitHub feature changes is right. Part of the reason why I'm asking is I want to make sure that if we put a note on the top, we're quite clear about for a user of this what to expect, and for like an aspiring community or open source contributor, like what kind of direction they should take if they want to, like if they are currently using it, they're totally willing to invest some of their time and they just want to know like what's my right next step, that we're giving them good guidance.
Yeah, that's a good point. Based on that, is there anyone here that has made the move from GraphQL Playground to graphical that might be willing to write even a basic how to move from Playground to graphical document, tutorial, guide, whatever you want to call it? Because it would be great to link to that, maybe a document in the graphical repo that we can link to from this Playground repo before we archive it. If anyone does know someone who's done that, please point them in my direction. All right, that's me done. Thanks.
Can we archive and then de-archive if someone comes up with something?
Yeah, not permanent. Cool. All right. Benji, do you want to take action on the archiving pieces directly, or do you want to defer and just file actions for those?
Yeah, I'll add it to my list, but it won't be done in a short time period because I think we need to prepare some text for it and stuff.
Okay, no worries. Shout my way if you want help with any of those pieces, or ping TSC members if you want to lean on anybody to help drive this. All right. Actually, wait. So I see Pascal, you made a bid to add an agenda item and a short one. Maybe we want to get to that before we kind of go into our deeper topic? Meeting cadence?
No. That was a reference to the community agenda. Just above, Michael asked if it's monthly, and then I linked the last point in the community working group from February. Is that they want to decide the meeting cadence and the.
Okay, thanks for clarification. Okay, well, in that case, we've got one thing left on the list, and it's a biggie, which is to go into streaming GraphQL updates. Rob, I hand the floor to you.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right, I think I got this right. You can see the agenda right now, and I have a editorial PR.
No, we're looking at code or VS Code or something like that.
Okay, I think I got it now.
That's it.
Okay, so I have a few things that I want to go through for defer and stream. The first one is this editorial PR. This is not completely related to defer, but it's something that we can pull out of the larger defer and stream changes and get this in the spec in the interest of making that other PR smaller. I talked about it in the last couple of meetings. Basically, it's taking the definition of path and decoupling it from errors, because we plan to reference that in the new incremental delivery response format. So I already got a approval from Benji. If some other people here can take a look, let me know what you think. I'd like to get this merged. And I believe that it's editorial, so we don't need to go through the steps. So yeah, if you guys can take a look and let me know what you think, then I'll go ahead and merge this if I get some approvals. Okay. Next thing is talking about the initial count argument on stream. So in the spec edits right now, we have a note where we talk about how the server is, although it's how we say that it's recommended that a server honors the defer and stream directives, but it's not required to. So if you're a server and you get a defer, you probably should do it. You probably should defer that fragment, but you're not breaking the spec if you have a really good reason not to. And same goes for stream. We also, we had talked about this a while back, but it came up again while we were doing these reviews. So I want to just make sure everyone is on board. We're saying that clients must be able to process a stream response that contains a different number of initial list items than what was specified in the initial count argument. So if you say stream initial count 2, again, server probably should be returning 2 items, assuming that the list is long enough for that in the initial response. But it could also return 3, or it could also return 1 or 0. That's the part that was a little bit controversial. Should we say that you have to return at least as many that the initial count says, or is it okay to return less?
I mean, what if the initial count is larger than the total set available? You're like, I want initial count 1 billion. It's like there's 5. What am I supposed to do?
Right. That's totally fine. I don't think there's disagreement there. I think that when it like if you're saying the initial count is 5 and there's 10, is it okay to return 2 and then stream the other 8?
Going back to our sort of like original principles for setting up the definition of stream and defer, the idea was that we would have the query describe the client's intention and then allow the server to do the most performant thing that it can given that stated intention. It's not immediately obvious what the right thing is here, but I think the way that we had arrived at this original argument for this behavior was setting an initial count was a like a performance product trade-off thing where the client is saying, you know, I want this many things before you start doing streams. So I think what you're proposing here does make sense. It's sort of like the client setting a constraint that says, hey, server, I don't actually want you to do performance optimizations that break this expected client behavior. So if you have 10 things in the canon and I ask you for 3, like don't give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like give me 3, then give me 4, 5, even though it's going to be slower. I've opted into the slower behavior by providing this argument. So anyway, my vote is yes, the server is required to honor the argument.
To honor at least as many.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
at least as many.
I think that when we had talked about it probably a few years ago, I definitely think that that perspective definitely makes sense and is probably most likely to be. I admit you could argue that that's what an end user like expects the most to happen. I think that the arguments against it were the first one, it preserves option value of if we're saying that the server can return less, then clients will never have like a limitation that they always expect that much or that the list would be shorter. And if this is a terrible decision, we can fix it. Going the other way is harder because clients could end up with it could be a breaking change for clients. And the other thing being that like if it's not going to break any kind of type system because all clients have to expect that it's possible the list is shorter than what they're expecting it to be. And maybe there is a case where you want to do something with your server and you know how it should be batched and you know where the client is. And yeah, so that's why I ended up with saying that it should be different instead of at least as many. But again, it's not like a super strong opinion, and I'm open to what we think is right. Matt, you have your hand raised?
I think I've basically flip-flopped in the course of this discussion, which is thinking from like somebody who supports GraphQL, the infrastructure. If a product developer came to me and was like, I can't debug why I set initial count to 3 and I'm getting 5 and then streaming, or I set initial count to 3 and I'm getting 1 and then streaming, and like, how do I make sure that I must get 3? And like, if that was not a true contract, I'd be like, I don't know, you gotta like look at the server and debug the server logic for why it chose to do that for you. And I think that would be actually like one of the advantages of GraphQL is that even if as a client person you are asking for data that, yeah, it's not as performant, and maybe you don't need it, maybe the server could in fact know that you don't need it, it's still going to give it to you when you explicitly ask for it. So which is
And again, like it's definitely I'm saying in the spec text I have like the RFC should language is like you should be doing what the client says, but it's like you're not breaking the spec if you don't. That's more of
Okay, so there's two separate things we're trying to accomplish here. One is allowing a smooth adoption curve to stream and defer, because obviously on the day this lands in the spec, we don't want instantly all implementations to be non-spec compliant, because stream and defer don't do anything. Like the very first thing that they should do is look at them and appropriately ignore them. They're like, stream and defer, cool. We don't support that yet. And they just continue to not stream and defer at all. So that's the kind of first aspect of this paragraph in here. The the other thing is then this idea of the client describes its intended, it's describing the set of things that it wants, but not how. And the server's role is to figure out how to assemble that data in the most performant way and get it back to the client. And we want to avoid scenarios where the client expects things that ties the server's hands from being able to do the more performant thing. And so the client should only do those if it is truly an intentional trade-off between user experience and performance, where the developer says, no, 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 the performant thing you're doing is actually net harmful, and I'm asking you to not do it. I'm providing an explicit constraint, which is part of why the initial count exists, because if we never cared about what that first paint looked like, this would not even be part of the spec. We would just allow them to be streamed in any arbitrary order. So I think option one here iterated out is definitely the right thing, because ignoring it completely implies that you could say, I want an initial count of 3, and then it gets ignored and it actually streams in 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. And that would cause a product developer to say, I actually have to just take stream off of this because it's not an acceptable product outcome, or do like some crazy post-processing on the front end. But doing more than 3 does seem reasonable, because you could imagine server has warm in cache 5 items, and splitting them out to be just 3 causes it to have to do cache invalidation and like run a bunch of logic that it would not have otherwise needed to run. And we probably want to say like, hey, server, like I expect you to send me at least this many in the first payload, and after which you can stream arbitrarily. Because we also similarly say, as you stream, items can come in batches, right? They don't have to come in exactly one at a time. If the server is ready with 2 or 3 at a time in the next batch, that's totally fine. That seems compatible with this option 1 text.
uh, yeah, I think I'm on board with that. And so I guess, is there any strong feelings about keeping option 2? Guess not. Yeah, so I'll go ahead. I'll make that change. I'll update. I'll put a summary of what we talked about in this discussion. Sorry, I see that a bunch of you left comments while I was talking about. I haven't read through those yet, but I will do that after this meeting. And
It
yeah,
also implies that if you omit this argument, then your initial count is 1. And then we can kind of describe it as like omitting this argument does not imply unknown behavior. It implies initial count 1. And by the way, initial count 1 means 1 or more, which is in line with the idea that streams can come in batches of multiple items if it's the most efficient way to do so.
we do have initial count defined as non-nullable with a default of 0. So leaving it out is equivalent to 0. Just want to make sure that's clear.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that the initial payload can come with none at all, and the first one can be streamed. Yeah. But then that also means leaving it out does not enforce if that non-nullable default 0. In the existing text, that would mean if the initial payload had any streamed items in them, that would be non-spec compliant. And now we're saying because an initial count, which defaults to 0 if not provided, means at least 0, then if the server decides I have these warm in cache, I can just send them the first set of them to you right away. That would not be a spec breaking thing to do, which seems good.
Right. Okay, cool. Next topic is I wrote a long description here, but the TLDR is that I want to all right, right now we have validation that's about in the overlapping fields can merge that says that you can't have a stream on different instances of the same field unless their arguments match. And we want to change it to just say that you can't have a stream on different instances of the same field at all. You can't do that at all. If you want to do that, you should alias. And to kind of work backwards, we came across like a very tricky scenario where you have an example like this. You have the same field. One is inside a defer. The other is not. They're both streamed. With the version of defer we have now, we don't have any fields being duplicated. Resolvers aren't called twice for things inside of defer and outside of defer. And it's very confusing. How do you resolve a situation where maybe I'm working on a component that has this version of stream here, and we have I add another field here. Maybe this is very expensive. I could be impacting the component that's in totally different other part of the tree that has that stream here and not realizing it. I think that I'm not doing that because it's inside of a deferred component. But even like boiling it down to without these defers, just with a simple example, it might be that you have two separate components in your tree. They both have stream. They both have the same fields on them. So they were merged. Everything was okay. But then going into this one component and adding a slow field, you're impacting another component. So I think it makes sense to, until we have like a better way to solve this, which maybe it's not an issue, maybe it is, for at least like the MVP of the spec to validate against this.
At the moment, you would need to have a defer to guarantee that the slow field would not impact the other component, right? Because you would merge and then you have like this side effect.
Yeah.
And to avoid the side effect, you
Right.
could put a defer on that.
Yeah, but we're going to but the proposal is to just not allow this.
Yeah.
This will be a validation error.
I think that's really smart. It's probably a net reduction in your proposed spec changes. It's like a
Yeah.
one-liner of actually This may already be how things work. Don't we do field merge validation with directives as well? Because you can't have like, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
We do, but we're saying here, typically with directives, if I have skip on like my list and it's the identical at skip, it's fine. We're saying here with at stream, no longer is it fine to be identical. So it is a slight update, but this is like, it's a special directive. Defer, it's fine for, I believe, for us to have these overlapping defers. But for streams.
Defers only on fragments.
Oh, yeah. But you can still have a defer in the same place in, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. You're right. It ends up being two different defers regardless.
And then when it comes to execution, if you imagine this this one that you've got on the screen at the moment, we were to skip the validation rule, someone's to choose to turn it off. I think what we would do there is we would just literally take the first entry in the collected fields. So the fact that there's a second one with very slow field would actually be ignored. So we'll rule against it with validation, but the execution algorithm has to work whether or not validation passes. So in that case, we would just take the first one.
I think that's slightly different than what happens now because I think that it will like so what happens now is we look at the first field and you're in the execution algorithm, we look at the first field and use the stream details from that first field. So and to clarify, I also mean in this case that a field with stream and a field without stream would also be a validation error. So skipping that, I think it's whatever comes first. That's what's happening. And then it does like collect the fields under that in the normal way. So happy to change this if we think this isn't the right behavior, but probably what would happen with the version of GraphQL JS now, if I just change the validation rule, is that it would return one stream with both of the fields since it would collect from both of them.
Man, I'm struggling to form like a very strong conviction on an opinion here. I think my guidance is to go with the thing that results in the least change because that probably correlates strongly with the thing that aligns tightest with existing expectation of behavior. Because it sounds like a existing validation error, which we would expect to remain a validation error, is if you deleted the first at stream in these two fields in this example. So you had my list, which was not streamed, followed by my list, which was streamed. And I believe our existing validation error or validation rule would catch that as an error because you have to have matching directives. That seems fine because you would be quite surprised if one thing you expected to be streamed all of a sudden stopped being streamed at all because of a related field getting added somewhere else. Do we, yeah, I think we might have special cases for if
do we have validation on
we don't
different
have
directives?
validation or with different directives because like the core directives, they are defined like skip. For instance, this is defined,
yeah,
especially with variables, but like custom directives are not considered in the validation.
that's right. You're right. Yeah, also part of the reason why I'm struggling to get a firm grasp here is like I understand on both sides, like there's DevX footguns on both sides here. The DevX footgun described clearly here is where you have, a complicated app. There's a handful of places where things are happening, and like someone in a corner somewhere adds a very slow field, and it net aggregates to something important elsewhere in the app being very slow. I empathize with that, but that's also kind of like how GraphQL works in general. Like it is just true that if you add a field somewhere, then that thing becomes slow, like the whole query becomes slow. And I worry a little bit about the modularization story here. I appreciate that we still don't yet have the like named fragment modularization building block that we want to have, which of course would solve this, right? Like if you had a named frag or like if you had one alias group for the first one and a separate alias group for the second one, then there would be separate streams and you would end up in a different space. The first one would be modularized away and would not be impacted by the second one. But I could certainly imagine an app where there actually are like two related components, but on like different corners of the application, both of whom have like carefully placed stream on their thing that needs to be streamed to make sure that things don't break. And then all of a sudden, like we introduce this rule, and like now it's like not possible to figure out how to compose up a query that allows both of those components to exist simultaneously, because they both need to access this field. They both expect it to be streamed. They both have slightly different field sets, which is fine because they're two separate components. They're just related. And I'm trying to think through like, if I hit that scenario as a developer, what do I do now in order to get to a point where my application works? And I think the answer is not much. Like I'm just kind of screwed, which seems bad.
No, the answer, unless you're sharing a fragment from two different, unless you've got a diamond fragment, the answer is just alias the field.
Exactly. Because in this case, it's just like differs on a fragment, but in this case, we could just alias the field. And I think it's also like in this case, if you have stream and non-stream on the field, it's completely different expectations how this field is resolved. So we cannot merge that.
But could the aliasing of the fields cause a separate performance regression? Say like the first one had A, B, and C, and the second one had B, C, and D. A, B, C, and D are all moderately inexpensive to load. But now, like if we were to alias them separately, we'd be trusting that our cache would be doing the right thing on the back end to load ABC, which nets to like 3 units of work, and BCD, which nets to 3 units of work. But if we allowed them to just merge, then we'd have ABCD, which nets to 4 units of work total. So that's actually faster than 3 + 3.
Yeah, but that's always the case with field aliases. Like,
And we
Yeah, but I mean
we always trust the underlying business logic to handle that kind of stuff anyway. Otherwise, we'd solve the n+1 problem natively.
yeah, of course that's right. I'm just more worried about it in the scenario where these end up being streamed such that they create separate root streams and those root streams end up being more expensive. Like we're essentially forcing someone, like are we ending up in a situation where because of a concern about a performance regression, we're forcing people into performance regressions?
So I think there's like three options. That one option is block it and worry about it later. And I think that's what we should do for now anyway, because we don't have a clear solution to this. Another option is to effectively merge it like we would field merging anyway. So we note that it is streamed. We treat the stream as if it were a defer because it effectively is, right? It's saying this stuff executes later. So then we're okay, sure. One of the streams would have got the thing that just had ID in it faster than now what it would get with ID and a very slow field. But either way, that work has been pushed away from that initial payload. And that's really the core, I think, of incremental delivery. Or we try and do something that's a bit more complex. I'm in favor of the earlier of those. I think the most value of incremental delivery comes from that initial payload being faster. And I'm not too worried about the second, third, fourth, fifth layers of incremental delivery. I think they give diminishing returns. And I would actually be okay if a server only honored the top layer of defer and stream and didn't worry about the rest. Like that would be okay by me. And it's also allowed by the spec. So that's my opinion.
Isn't that, I think the principled framing there is the right one, because this very slow field here is being added in a place where it does not affect the first of the incremental deliveries because it is being streamed, right? Like the first one would omit any items of my list. And then only on the subsequent incremental payloads would you then get a stream source, which includes both ID and very slow field.
Rob, could you scroll up to your previous example that had the defer fragment? This one makes it clearer why it's a little bit more complex because it has an initial count
Yeah.
of 1. So here, the name, if it was expensive, has to be included in that first thing, but we've deferred it in the second part, but like that's the defer is outside of where the stream would be merged. So it gets really complex to think about.
I suspect server maintainers would really appreciate at least the first iteration of stream disallowing this.
And we should keep in mind that server maintainers can always choose to disallow this. They can just add an extra validation rule that says, we do not accept queries of this form.
True.
Like,
Yeah.
after half a day, you got an issue that it has to be supported. Business
I'm pretty
critical.
sure. I'm pretty sure some people say, like, isn't it Andy said that he's got clients who do not allow field aliasing, like at all, no field aliases. It's fine, it's a validation rule.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I'll withhold like a specific direction from myself as spec editor here because I don't feel strongly convicted. My sense is the right set of principles to hold are this is like a balancing act between do the simplest thing, which is like whatever thing nets out fewer lines of spec text and fewer lines of GraphQL JS is like likely guiding you in the correct path. Or the stick an overly restrictive thing in place that allows us to come back to this later. And it sounds like that's the rough proposal is to stick the thing that allows us to come back to this later, which seems reasonable. I think the spot where I started to lose the thread was where we said, well, what actually happens during field collection and execution? And if we have like a bunch of custom behavior in field collection and execution, to just for this like particular problem, that would indicate to me that we've overthought the problem. Especially if we think there's a future path where by simply removing the validation rule, after we like fix one or two other things or just decide that we wanted to come back to this decision and make it differently, we want to have that path through. So
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a solvable problem. I think it probably requires like more stuff to happen in the response format and more stuff to happen in the execution. So we could like, actually make these distinct, send the fields that are common together, send the fields that are deferred separately on their own way, have a way for like a stream to send like results and merge them together. But I think that it's a heavy-handed solution. And I think we're not sure how big of an issue it is. So that's why I'm leaning towards like blocking it now and going from there.
One
Pretty
thing
reasonable.
to note, I just want to point out because I just tried it internally, so I now know this. We do allow diamond fragment spreads, spreading the same fragment at the same location where that fragment has one at stream on it. And that makes sense to me as well, because it's like it's one path from the server. Or it's one path that the server is resolving at that point. So it's fine that you end up with that diamond.
Yeah, and I think that with this proposal, that would still be allowed.
Yeah, just wanted to close the loop because I did make that call out.
Would it still be allowed? We'll talk about this afterwards, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to update my PRs with this validation rule. I'm gonna update GraphQL JS, and in the error that throws, I'll put a link back to this issue. So if someone updates GraphQL JS alpha, and of course this is behind experimental flags and everything, so if someone does run into this, they'll be pointed to the place to let us know how big of an issue it is for them. All right, and last thing is I have this PR, spec edits, incremental delivery, section 3 only. This is a very tiny piece of the larger PR. I would love everyone to focus their review. If you have some time for reviewing, focus it here. This is targeting an integration branch, which right now is still equivalent to the main branch. But I want to get this in here, open up the next one, and just keep going piece by piece every month. So I see Benji has left a review. I'll go through that later this week. And yeah, I think that's it for me then.
Very exciting progress. All right. That wraps our agenda. Anything else anyone wants to talk about before we wrap it up? Okay. Thank you, Rob, for the deep dive. As always, thanks for all your attention and focus on this problem. This is a huge one, and it's always exciting to see all the progress you make every month. And thanks for folding us in on the process. And again, thanks to our new TSC members. Glad to have you here. All right, everybody, that's a wrap on the meeting. See you all in
Bye.
the field. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.